Hello and welcome everyone to another episode with LLD Conversations. I'm your host for today, David Brackett, the chair of the NCIHC Workgroup Committee, Languages of Limited Diffusion. And in these conversations, we love to talk and interview thought leaders, pioneers in our industry that are doing big things, especially in the limited language diffusion space where we're seeing some really exciting things happen. And today we get a real treat to interview Sue Ellen Wright. Who is Sue Ellen Wright? Well, I'm going to read a little bit about her bio, and then we're going to get a chance to meet with her. Sue Ellen Wright is an emerita professor of German and was a member of the Kent State University Department of Modern and Classical Languages Studies, where she taught computer applications for translators and German to English technical translation. She is a past chair for the ATA Terminology Committee and is ATA certified for German to English translation. She's active as a terminology trainer and consultant for companies and institutions implementing terminology management in localization environments. Another really exciting piece about Sue Ellen is that she is the current chair of the technical advisory group for the ISO technical committee. So really huge credential to have there. And lastly, something that I'll be talking about as well, and I know Sue Ellen didn't want me to be bragging about this for her, but she's also compiled the handbook for terminology management and is the author of many articles on applied terminology management in our industry. So without further ado, Sue Ellen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi.
Welcome to the show. And Sue Ellen, for all of our audience here, tell us where you are tuning into from today.
I'm in Kent, Ohio. You've probably heard of Kent State University. It's just a little bit south and east of Cleveland in the United States.
Wonderful. And Sue Ellen, tell us a little bit about, for those of us who don't know you yet, tell us how you got involved in the language industry.
Well, it's a long, like many things, it's a long story. I always tell people that, and I have a good friend, Barbara Ingekosh, who some of you may know. We always laugh about the fact that we were sort of born terminologists. My family was fascinated with the names of things. I can remember my grandmother walking around on Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado and picking up stones and saying, "This is feldspar, this is granite. This is quartz, this is." And my mother is saying, well, you have to know all the names of the plants in the garden, whether they're important or whether they're weeds. If you don't know what things are, how can you do anything with them? So I'm just always been fascinated with the names of things. And I trained to teach German language and literature, but at the time, my husband and I got ready to actually get jobs. There was a sudden dearth of jobs, and we ended up working in industry of translators. And when you work in industry as translators, you encounter all sorts of things that you've never heard of, and you need to know what the equivalents of these unknown things are in your other language. In my case, I work with German and English, but I ended up working in a company where I worked with Spanish and French and sometimes Portuguese and Italian. So working with lots of languages and dealing with them and having to check the terms, because sometimes terms are very, very slippery. You think you've got a term that has an equivalent in the other language, but it doesn't really mean the same thing in the other language. Of course, when we're dealing with indigenous languages, we have the added factor that there are large cultural differences. There's a huge amount of incredible knowledge about the world around us and the environment of that language and that community. It is encapsulated in the language. One of my favorite things is that the word river in one of our North American languages is a verb. Because stop and think about it, the river is never silent. It's always moving. We think of river as a noun, and we say the river flows, the river rages, the river does all kinds of things, but we wouldn't. So that we need to know, and that just little things like that enable us to see how that other culture looks at language. And we need a way to document that.
That's fascinating. Yeah, I love that. And what language were you talking about there?
I was suddenly. I'm sorry. I'm drawing a blank on it. I'd have to look it
Okay,
up.
well,
Sorry.
that's fine. We'll look it up.
Yeah.
And for the audience here today, Sue Ellen, can you give us sort of an overview on what terminology guidelines for indigenous languages entail?
Well, the first concern with many indigenous languages, not all, but many indigenous languages are shrinking. In fact, in any given time, you can, every day, articles and blogs and information are flowing into my systems about how this or that language is down to a very small number of native speakers. What's happening, and this is partly in North America, it's partly due to the fact that in North America, in both Canada and the United States, children were taken out of their homes and sent to boarding schools so they could learn English and French and speak proper languages. And consequently, those young people didn't learn everything that they needed to know. And their grandparents are now dying because they're old, not because there's anything wrong with them, but and what we see, and we've seen this, I know, in our Translation Commons group, we've interviewed young people in Mexico who are encountering the same kind of thing. Young people they speak Spanish and English, but they're trying to preserve the language of their grandparents, which is rapidly shrinking and disappearing, or that has not been documented. And this is where my standards work comes in. One of the things that we've done recently is, it's not all quite finished, but we have a new standard. It's ISO 21636 Part 2, and Parts 1 and 3 are following on very shortly, where we address procedures and bits of information that need to be documented when one is interviewing a speaker of an endangered language. How old are they? Where do they come from precisely? Do they speak a variant in relationship to other speakers of very closely related languages? Since these languages aren't written down, we don't have rules the way we do in English and Spanish. So if there's a question, I'll revert back to try to use very proper Spanish, for instance, if I want to communicate. But that's not necessarily a choice when we're dealing with languages that were never documented. And we have I won't go through all the parameters, but this standard does a beautiful job of outlining the kinds of, are you talking to a man or a woman? Does that make a difference in this culture? Because in some cultures, men and women use very different forms. Right. Are there variations in the terms that you are using? Just part of speech, which may seem simple if your languages are English, French, German, Spanish, because they've all been documented by dictionary specialists for the last many decades and centuries. You have to figure out what kinds of systems are used and how do I document that? Just the fonts. How do I write this? Does this language use standard Latin? If I'm in North Africa, can I document it with Arabic script? If I'm in Thailand, can I document it with Thai script? Or do these people have an ancient script that they developed? There's a gorgeous script that's been developed in Bolivia, for instance, that reflects usage by in the Quechua language before the time of the conquest. And when you have a new script, and this is something that Translation Commons has been doing, can I use that on a computer? How do I digitize? We talk about digitizing new script so that we can actually use the script that belongs to the language, that reflects the language. And we got a keyboard and we can develop text. We can even use the internet to do it.
And what kind of a role you mentioned children, what kind of a role do the children play in salvaging these languages?
It's usually what happens is typically the people that I know of who end up doing this, the children are often college students or college graduates, people who've gone off out into the world, and then they realize the importance of what they have at home. And they come back with a certain knowledge of linguistics, a certain knowledge of English or Hindi or some major language that they're using as their mode of expression. But they go back into their community and try to interview, and part of it is most of the time, if it's a child doing this, and it's grandma or something like that, this is not that hard to establish the rapport that is needed for this. However, there are people who are trained as linguists to do this sort of thing, and they work with interested people in the community. But these are trained linguists, and sometimes this works and sometimes it doesn't. In the Cherokee Nation, they have made amazing strides, just wonderful stuff they've done. Go out to the Cherokee Nation website, and they have you may even be familiar with it, incredible resources and documenting their language. By the same token, there are other, and I'm even loath to list them, there are other nations in North America that are less willing to cooperate. I'm thinking of one in particular where my cousin actually was a veterinary intern with them, and he found that they were very suspicious of outsiders, even though he was able to offer a great deal of positive value to them, and he's a wonderful guy who would not be at all difficult in a situation like that. But some peoples, because of their past experience, are very reluctant to let outsiders in to do this sort of thing.
Yeah, as far as like what that information is going to be utilized for.
Exactly. And whether somebody else is going to own something that, and of course there are in many cultures, there are taboo areas that are perhaps not even shared between men and women in the culture itself, or that are only the province of special initiates. So sharing that kind of information outside of the culture is just out of the question. So it's not easy.
Yeah.
But the need to establish rapport and every time we lose a language, we lose something precious in our cultural heritage and our knowledge of the world.
Yeah. And then the stories and the history
and histories that go with it. Yes. Absolutely. Yeah.
So valuable, the work that you're doing, Sue Ellen. I just applaud you for helping spearhead this initiative. How, for people that are listening, how can they be able to get involved, and where can they learn more information?
Well, if you're interested in volunteering, most of this work is volunteer. It's not a way to make money. We have, and I don't have the stats on it, but you can fill them in later, perhaps. Translation Commons, the language digitization project, has been involved in creating keyboards and disseminating information, doing interviews like this, getting blogs out, and we have a large number of wonderful multilingual interns and volunteers who've been doing work with us, and I heartily recommend look up the Translation Commons website. I don't have I'd have to look it up, but it's if you search Translation Commons, you'll find it, and look at a wealth of information we've got there. And if you want to volunteer, all you have to do is follow the links and sign up.
And be able to volunteer. I think it's translationcommons.org. I want to say is the URL. So,
We have,
yeah.
excuse me, we have a wealth of information. We've written a number of handbooks. We call them guidelines, and on all kinds of different topics, which would be extremely valuable, especially if you find yourself in a, maybe you are a member of a group and you'd like to get involved in retaining some of the information that is there in your community that you're afraid will disappear. We have all sorts of guidelines that can be followed up on.
Fascinating. Well, I just want to encourage everyone to take a moment, check out the translationcommons.org website to be able to learn more information. And hopefully some of you are interested in volunteering as well, because it takes a village to be able to take this work to the next level. And like Sue Ellen mentioned, there's so many languages that do unfortunately die away without this kind of work. So yeah, we don't want to see that happen. And we just applaud you again, Sue Ellen, for the work that you're doing, which is literally saving languages and saving these stories that come with them.
I'm not, I have colleagues who are doing that. I'm not in the field doing it, but I'm telling people how they can create. What I am doing really is teaching people how to create terminology databases to save the information so that it's accessible to people.
Yeah, and that's it's a huge part of it. So I just want to say thank you again, Sue Ellen. We're running out of time. So
yes,
we appreciate you. It was a pleasure to have you here on LLD Conversations. Be sure and tune in for other episodes. This is the last part of a 3-part series where we interviewed Jeanette and Dr. Craig, and then now here's Sue Ellen. So it's been a great series, learning all about Translation Commons and all the incredible work that they're doing in the indigenous language community.
Super. And if you know of anybody who needs help, let us know. Because Dr. Craig is terrific. He's doing lots of great work. Yeah.
Sure is. All right. Well, Sue Ellen, thank you so much. Go enjoy time with your daughter. Go have a great lunch. And we will connect again soon, hopefully.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.